Izuku Midoriya is different. Far, far different in this story. Inko Midoriya, his mother, begins to have a whole different outlook on the world. But that's all because of her profession. Her profession in this regard is a scientist. She's a scientist with one other person that she's been relatively close friends with for a little while now. But they've been working endlessly around quarks, around where they came from and what would happen if quarks continue to evolve. They were actually under someone that they didn't know exactly who it was. A top mob boss by the name of Overhaul was the person at the very, very top for them. But they didn't even know who this was. They just knew that they got supplied with a certain amount of money, and it allowed them to continue their research. Their research would tell them various things, a lot about quarks and a lot about what could happen in the near future. During this time though, Inko would get pregnant with her baby boy by the name of Izuku Midoriya, 3 years prior to normal when Izuku normally gets born. But here's the main issue. When Izuku is born, there seemingly is a problem with the young child. It seems as if the young child isn't able to more or less live on his own. It seems as if breathing is even a hard thing for this young child. Izuku begins to struggle throughout 1 to 2 years. He's just a young baby trying to just survive at this point. His mother, Inko Midoriya, has no idea what to even do, but eventually the idea of bringing him into the lab would come about. And this would come about because after one night, Izuku would flatline, and the baby would, well, unfortunately pass away. But Inko would refuse to let that be the end. She would bring the young child to the lab, and they would begin experiments, putting him in a giant incubation tube and continue working with cell after cell. It seems as if they begin to use the DNA of various other people to continue research on basically curing or saving Izuku. But is that truly all she wanted to do? Is that really all Inko wanted? Was to just save Izuku? Izuku Midoriya unfortunately would be denounced dead. So there was no necessarily saving him anymore. She began to do experiments on his body in a chamber, like I said before. But all of these experiments began to dive deeper and deeper into her own psyche. Her and her partner, or lab partner at that, began to do experiments via DNA, getting DNA from various amounts of heroes that they could get their hands on relatively easily. Top heroes would have interviews, would have spots in their agencies, would have fan meetups. All of these things would allow them to get some sort of DNA. In doing this though, it seems as if every single last one of them were able to get DNA for all of these heroes. Inko would be funded by the Shiha Zaikai, especially with the amount of money they were pulling in. This project would continue on. Overhaul began to believe that this right here was a project that could have been, well, transcended in time, could truly be groundbreaking. Now what they're making is something special. He doesn't know the details in specific form, but he does know they're making some sort of, well, person or creature that can withstand quirk on quirk on quirk. But not in a way of a monster, an adaptive creature or human being that would take on the DNA of the likes of Endeavor, the likes of All Might, the likes of Overhaul. All of these people, that's what they would take on. But also, on top of that, many, many, many pro heroes. Izuku would continue to be built within this lab, or created for say. Years would pass on, and Izuku would begin growing in the tube as if he were growing like a normal kid. From the age of 1 to 2 to 5 to 10, All of these years would pass by, but Izuku would accelerate in age rapidly, far, far quicker than anyone would imagine. On top of this, Inko's partner that she didn't even really know their name, only going by the code name Time, was something interesting. Time was a female, a woman with white hair, and she was trying to do a certain experiment, bringing the DNA of a young child to Izuku's, containment tank. She would add that said DNA and watch as it would react with the other quartz that are within Izuku, or at least with the other DNA that is within Izuku. Inko would ask what's going on, and everything would begin to get revealed. The scientist, other known as codename Time, would begin speaking with Inko and introducing herself as someone extremely important to all of this. There's a reason why she's been working alongside Inko, and a reason why Overhaul has her here. And that reason is because of her daughter, Eri. Inko begins to learn more and more about this child. Eri is powerful. Eri is extremely powerful. But at the time, she was kept in an incubation chamber as well, so that nobody else would know about her. And this was just for the safety of the Shiha Hazaikai and the future of them as well. They want to wipe this place off the face of the planet, or wipe all quarks off the face of the planet, so Eri is crucial. And of course, Inko would look into the database about what Izuku now has, and it seems like he has some sort of rewind-esque quirk, but his powers are so different. The making of Izuku is different. Izuku is a combination of many. Combinations of IQs of All Might Endeavor and many other heroes, but also villains alike, anything they possibly could have gotten. But it's really not that simple. Izuku may be powerful, may potentially be strong, but as the time would pass by and it would be finally time for him to take his steps out of the chamber, he would do just that. He would take his steps out and he would be around the age of 16, at least based on his body type. But he would look around at his arms, his legs, and the technology all around, and he'd feel odd, as if he isn't actually there, as if he's connected to this sort of body unconditionally, as if he can't move, as if he's locked in, as if he has no control. And immediately Izuku would begin to walk, but he would feel as if he couldn't move at all, but everything else was moving. He would look around and he would sit down at the request of Inko and the agent Time. They would sit there and wait and stare at Izuku and begin to speak with him, asking certain questions, and Izuku would not react and not talk at all. It seems kind of odd. They think that maybe he's incomplete, maybe he's broken, but Izuku would then begin to see everything that occurred before this. His life flashing before his eyes, and many, many other things that he didn't even realize could have occurred. All in a matter of seconds, this rushes back to him, and he gasps for air as if he just came out of water while holding his breath for hours. He breathes in deep, coughs slightly, but then now has full regain of his body, of the body that was gifted to him. He speaks to the people in front of him, asking who they are. Inko introduces herself as his mother. He looks at her oddly, not feeling any connection to her or the one next to her. But oddly enough, the woman with the white hair next to Inko feels more connected to him than even Inko does. But that's because of Eri. He has a connection with Eri and has that DNA as well. He would look around to see many other incubation chambers, many with the label of failed. Of course, he would continue to walk as he sees one more, a young girl within that incubation chamber. He would stare at it slightly and put his hand on the glass window. As he does, the incubation chamber begins to crack, and Eri wakes up immediately and smashes through the glass and just lays there unconscious. They're shocked, thinking Izuku broke it, but Izuku tells them that he didn't break anything, picking the young girl up and wrapping her in a blanket. Izuku looks at them, saying that he has a connection with this one. He wants to know why. An explanation is told, and of course he kind of knew why this would be the case and knew exactly what would happen. Izuku was interested in what's going on and even asked what kind of business do they want from him. Why would they bring him back to life? He obviously was just a child when, well, he died and he passed away. But why? Why would they bring him back? They could have done this with anybody. And frankly, it probably would have been easier. Izuku makes this abundantly clear, and it's explained that, well, Inko wanted her son, and the potential that Izuku possibly had was endless, especially with who they were and how smart Inko is, and so is his father. Izuku sort of buys this, but also thinks that there must be an overarching idea and an overarching plan that they have in wait, and even questions it. And Inko tells him to not really worry, that there's no plan exactly set right now. But then Izuku would begin to question them further, asking the woman with the white hair who this girl is to her, explaining that that is her daughter. He asks if her daughter was killed just like him and was revived via all of this. And the white-haired girl, or the white-haired woman, or Time, hesitates and then says that she was killed and brought back. Izuku knows that this is a lie, but just decides to keep that to himself, nodding slightly and begins to ask who was able to basically allow this all to happen. Obviously, there has to be an overarching person. He has all of this DNA, so he assumes it's one of them, or one of the people in his DNA, but who is it? They explain that it's Overhaul from the Shia Hazaikai, and that is who they work for. Izuku nods and begins to think that maybe it's time to leave and test out his strengths and abilities. He begins to walk out, but then decides to stop, backing up and grabbing the little girl that's in a blanket, telling them to keep her out of the incubation chamber, that if they don't, that will be an issue. They're going to restrict her power, and, well, it's going to restrict her growth in general. And he can assume that her power is extremely potent. I mean, he can feel it boiling within himself, and he has no idea how to control it. Izuku would walk out and tell them that he'll be back. He wants to test something out. He leaves with all of the knowledge of, well, literally everything that he needs to know. From Inko, from Time, or from the white-haired woman, or Eri's mother, from Eri, as little as what she knows, All Might, Endeavor, Overhaul, everything you can possibly think of. The DNA and basically the knowledge was given to him. He begins to go around, looking around as he comes across the building, seeing his reflection. His reflection is a giant-like monster. He seems odd to this. They didn't react to it at all, but how is that even possible? He sees that his skin is a bit scaly and a bit changed, but once he focuses hard enough, he begins to change into the form that he most resembles by. It's the normal version of himself. He begins to walk around, look around, see everybody and everything. As he continues to walk, he comes across something going on. He comes across a giant ruckus. This giant sludge villain is running around destroying thing after thing. Izuku heads over to see what's going on, looking around to see that there's no heroes that are able to really help out and even stop it. So he decides something. He's no hero, but he does need a bit of a fight, and he does need to test his strength. He begins to head over and walk toward the villain. He heads over and many try to stop him, but it's as if there's this aura of strength and power that pushes everybody away. Not necessarily push them physically, but they watch as he walks up, and none of them even try to stop him. He walks over to the sludge villain as the sludge villain grabs onto him and tries to take over his body, but Izuku doesn't even flinch. He spits out the sludge himself, and all this electricity begins to surround the sludge villain as he begins to scream in pain and just explode. Izuku would look around and see that everybody is completely shocked, completely flabbergasted. How is he able to do that? No, this is bad. He's not even a hero. He's just a kid. Izuku would jump off in a matter of seconds and be gone. But of course, he altered his appearance before he did this. He wants to walk around in the form he wants to walk around in, so now he's in something that nobody will necessarily recognize. News would quickly spread of this random person, someone that nobody knew, instantly destroying a villain that was rampaging against heroes that had nothing that they can even do or possibly do. Agencies, hero schools, and all alike would be trying to find out who this person was. He seemed like a teenager, some random kid that just came across a ton of power and just stepped in front of a hero's job. Out of nowhere, he just came about, and wow, they would be pretty correct on that regard, but of course they don't know that for sure. Izuku would head back to the lab, and when he would arrive, he would be told by his mother that that was a horrible idea. He's going to expose himself, out himself, but Izuku questions why it even matters. Why exposing himself matters to that degree. He wants to learn more about this place. He knows so little. He knows all that maybe these others know, but it's from a very concise perspective, and he has so many of them that it's as if it's more confusing that way. It's all narrowed down. That's what he wants to do. He wants to be able to put on a set of goggles and see things clearly through his own eyes, through his own well-constructed eyes. He tells them this and begins to leave, but just as he does, he's stopped by a figure with a mask on, telling him to go sit back down. Izuku doesn't know what he's talking about and just pushes past him, but just as he does, his life flashes in and out in a matter of seconds, and he breathes in as if he was drowning for hours. He begins to pant, and he looks toward the man. What the hell did you just do? Overhaul tells him to go sit down now. He does just that, and Overhaul explains something to him. That he was created for the sole purpose of changing this world, changing society. What he has isn't necessarily quirks. What he has is power, and he needs to use it how he's supposed to use it, not how he wants to use it. Izuku looks at the man that just did this to him, and this information, well, he gets is extremely crucial. Not only that, he was given information about how the powers that Overhaul holds himself works. So for now, Izuku needs to play nice. He looks at Overhaul and tells him that he's fine with that. He'll go along with whatever he wants him to do, and what would that like to be? And Overhaul says that he's not against the idea of him getting experience, narrowing those goggles, but he'll need to do that in a different way. They need to reveal who he is, but nicely, as if as if he's a protector, someone that will truly stand for the rights of everyone, someone that would be built in a lab but relatable at the same time, someone that's been torn apart from his own family in a way, torn apart from his body, recreated into a being that is truly a protector of many. Izuku hears all of what Overhaul is saying. He then tells him that he'll do just that. He'll follow in whatever he wants to do, and he'll go along with this whole plan. And Overhaul tells him good, that he doesn't have a choice in this anyways. And he begins to explain to him exactly what they want to do. And that all has to do with information. He wants solid information. He lays out a simple plan and tells him that there's a couple things he needs to get done. First of all, he's young enough to enroll in one of the high schools. He doesn't care what high tier high school, low tier high school, or the highest of tier high schools in UA. He doesn't care, and it doesn't matter. He just needs to get into one. That's all that matters. He's smart enough to do that, and he should know all the material relatively easily, especially with his high intellect, which he assumes was given to him. He begins to look around as Inko and obviously Eri's mother nod, and he begins to explain further that he just needs to do this, and then on top of that, he needs to get in with the League of Villains. Izuku's confused. He wants him to get into a hero school, but also be part of one of the most notorious villain groups. That doesn't really make sense. And of course, Overhaul says that it doesn't have to make sense, that he just needs to do it because he needs leverage. He needs to be able to have or be able to get information on the side of the heroes, but maybe even be an informant for the villains. Izuku hears this and nods about it. And just as he begins to think more and more about a plan, Overhaul is gone. Inko asks if Izuku is okay, and Izuku says that he's fine. He's just fine. That's what he needed. It's just a bit of a wake-up call. He walks out without saying another word, and Izuku begins to head to a location that he believes he can find the League of Villains. As he arrives, he begins to look around, and he's grabbed and dragged into a building. As he's pulled in, Shigaraki and many others surround him, including a giant monster-like creature. Izuku tells him that, well, that's exactly the person he's been looking for. And immediately Shigaraki puts his hand to Izuku's throat, leaving one finger off, telling him that he'll kill him right now if he doesn't speak quickly. Izuku does just that, telling him that he needs to get into this little league. And immediately he thinks that this is some sort of setup. Izuku tells him that this is no setup. Exactly what he heard on the news is correct. Shigaraki's confused. What, kid? You mean you're telling me that you're just some random guy that just appeared out of nowhere? You're telling me that you're just a random guy that just came out of nowhere? Izuku smirks slightly. And as Shigaraki has come to his own conclusion and realized that Izuku is serious, he really is a person that's just appeared out of nowhere. He questions one last time if Izuku is some sort of lab experiment. He looks at Izuku once again and silence fills the room, and he says that he doesn't even want to know. He tells him that if he can benefit the League of Villains, feel free, but other than that, why would they even have him here? They have no idea what he can do. Izuku explains that he wants to join them, but at the same time, he'll do something very crucial because he needs information as well from some other people. He'll be an informant on the inside of UA High School. Izuku begins to say this, and Shigaraki is shocked as if he somehow figured out that this would be the case and that they needed this. But of course, Izuku makes it abundantly clear that he didn't really know that they needed this. But he did know that every good villain group needs information, an informant, and that's who they got. They say they have one other person to do so as well, and Izuku is about to tell them that they don't need him to join or need him to go, but they say that that is not a choice because All For One has already picked him out and have gifted him a quirk. Izuku shrugs and says that's fine, but tell him to stay out of his way. Of course, that can be arranged, and that would be just fine, and they don't see anything wrong with that at all. And frankly, it works out better this way. They're going to have two people in there, two people to slightly work together, but at the same time gather information that maybe one of them wouldn't get. So Izuku leaves, and they're completely confused, and obviously they don't really care exactly what happens to Izuku, and they can tell that there is no connection between them. Of course, Izuku can do whatever the hell he wants, but he has no information about the League of Villains. Literally zero. So if he decides not to help them, well then he decides not to help them. But All for One comes up on the screen and says that Shigaraki did a good thing. He weighed the risks, he weighed the rewards. The rewards are far higher than the risks at this moment, and if the boy decides to go off on his own and do whatever he wants, well then he does that. But if he tends to come back and threaten them, well, they'll deal with what needs to be dealt with. Of course, this is exactly what Shigaraki wanted to hear, and they're happy to hear that everyone is on board. Izuku would arrive finally at UA. Days would pass, and eventually it would be the UA entrance exam. Izuku would fly through it with flying colors, and frankly, there would be some question marks about where he came up, but they would have proper documentation that would say a certain middle school that he went to, far, far away, that many didn't really know about, and some information, other information that they needed to know. Birth records and birth certificates and stuff like that. Izuku would continue, take tests, and pass them with relative ease, flying colors at that, eventually leading to the entrance exam, or the practical version of it. The gates would swing open, and just like how you would expect, Izuku destroys robots after robots, even testing out some powers that had him very interested, revealing some sort of fire-like power by touching a robot and making it melt instantaneously, and on top of that, using Overhaul's quirk at the same time to basically disassemble a robot entirely as well. Izuku's testing out his powers here and there. And eventually the zero-pointer would be revealed. Izuku would stare at it and slightly smirk. As he begins to float into the air, he basically flies at the zero-pointer and utterly and totally obliterates it. Izuku can feel that that would be the max of his power. He just basically emptied out the tank. Don't get me wrong, he's not exhausted by any means, but he also doesn't know much about his powers in totality. He's only been really kicking for a little bit. So he doesn't know what's his full and max potential. Maybe he'll find out soon, but right now he's definitely restricted. With that said though, Izuku would float back down, land on the ground, and hear the alarms go, saying that the, entrance exam is over. But in the stands, the teachers are watching. The agency is watching. Heroes alike are watching. Where the hell did this kid come from, and how is he so strong? Aizawa, Nezu, All Might, and many others watch on in complete awe, but at the same time, in complete confusion. It seems like he has no drawbacks. It seems like he has no weakness. What is he? Is he somehow some otherworldly monster that they didn't even know about? Or does he have some sort of perfected quirk, and is this the new stage of quirk evolution that they didn't even know about? Some kid just comes out of nowhere with power that is beyond some regular quirk? Is this the next evolution to life? They don't even know. They're trying to think of anything. They look at his records, and even medical records are so slim to none, they know very little. All it says for his quirk is that he has some sort of strength enhancement. That's it. They know that's not the case. He has to have more, but where does he even come from? What is even going on? Well, they're gonna have to find out, especially after they allow him into UA, because those results do not lie. Last we left off, Izuku Midoriya finally finished the UA entrance exam. He was able to test out his power for the first time, truly ever, unrestricted and unknowingly to him. He was far more powerful than he could possibly imagine. He was able to show some things, and even beyond the levels of some pro heroes, especially on the way it looked about it in terms of the teachers. The teachers would watch on as Izuku would obliterate the UA entrance exam and could see that it seemed like as if he was just warming up. And to Izuku, of course he was. He was just warming up, but at the same time, he doesn't really understand his powers either. Some more time would pass and Izuku would head back to the League of Villains base, but also his main base, and only in contact with Overhaul. It seems that there has been a disconnect between him, his mother, or quote-unquote mother, which he questions even more now, but also some other people that he was working with, quote unquote. Of course, Izuku is a product of literally just being made in a lab. That's who Izuku is. He doesn't remember even having a life before. He doesn't necessarily have human emotions. This is just what he is, a piece of work. But it seems as if the combination of all of this DNA from various other heroes and villains and many others alike gave him the will and want to fight. On top of that, giving him the urges of other things, as if basically wanting to learn and learn more and more. But of course, he's already has an extremely high IQ. Izuku would, with how many people he has DNA of. In terms of their IQ, it's extremely high as well, making his IQ extremely high. Izuku would continue on just working with what he had, mostly working with the League of Villains and knowing exactly what they wanted to get done. Izuku made it, or it was pretty clear that Izuku didn't want anything to do with the heroes, and it was as if he had a whole agenda himself. And of course, we know this to be completely true. Izuku does have his own agenda and does have his own thing that he needs to get done. The League of Villains is just basically a stepping stone to doing so, but of course Izuku can make up his own mind. He hasn't necessarily basically made up his mind in terms of what he's doing, in terms of overhaul, in terms of the people that literally created him, and in terms of the people around him. And eventually he would get his letter sent to an unknown address. Of course, he doesn't actually live there, but he would pick it up, seeing the man or a mailman delivering that said letter. He would grab it to see that he obviously got into UA, and he would wait for the first day of UA to arrive. And when that first day would arrive, he would enter the classroom and would avoid all conversation, more or less. Not really talking to many people, and not even basically trying to interact as much as possible. Only reason for this is he knew his limitations. Even interacting just one-on-one wasn't the easiest thing for Izuku. He wasn't the best at conversation, and sometimes he would sound, really mean, way too nice, or even sometimes creepy. This is going to happen sometimes, especially when you're getting used to stuff like this. But just as he starts hearing more and people talk, and hearing more and more things, he'll eventually adapt perfectly, and he should be just fine in terms of being a conversationalist. Izuku would wait for his teacher to arrive, but just as he's sitting there, he sits there waiting, seeing every single classmate walk into the building, he would eventually see someone else. A boy with blonde spiky hair, and he would stare at him as he walks by. Izuku, deep down inside, for some reason, wanted to fight this kid. He wanted to fight him. He doesn't know why, he doesn't know the connection he has, or maybe any connection he has to him at all, but for some reason, that's him. He wants to fight him. He's not sure why. He doesn't understand it, and he gets the same feeling from people like All Might. When he sees him on a TV screen, he thinks to himself that he wants that challenge. But at the same time, what does all this truly mean? And maybe when he sees All Might in person, he won't actually feel this way. Just like how he's feeling right now. Nonetheless, though, he keeps his calm and waits for his teacher to arrive, and it's Shota Aizawa. And he sees him and immediately can recognize who he is and knows exactly what his quirk is, because Shota Aizawa, or Eraserhead's quirk, is within Izuku. And he realizes this and even can believe to himself that maybe he knows and has the quirk of Aizawa as well. Aizawa begins to explain that they're not going to go to this little praising fest that they always go to normally, this orientation or whatever. No, they're actually going to have a bit of an assessment, a quirk assessment. Aizawa continues to look around and eventually spotting Izuku, not maintaining eye contact but seeing him, and even Izuku can dignify that Aizawa was making sure that he was in this class. He questions himself, Izuku does at least, thinking that maybe he knows that he's part of, the villain group for now and working with them. Or maybe he's just excited to have him in the class. Or maybe he's curious. He wants to know if Izuku really has just a strength enhancement quirk, or is it far more than that? Of course, we know it's far more than that. Izuku has many quote-unquote quirks, but these are just powers adapted to his body to his body to the point that it doesn't even deform him. It's adaptive entirely. So his body is fine with all of these quote-unquote quirks. They're more like superpowers at this point, something that is built within himself, something that is perfectly adapted to his own body and basically genetic structure. Finally, Aizawa would tell them all to head out to get basically their PE uniforms on, and then eventually meet him outside, getting ready for a quirk assessment. When they arrive, Aizawa calls up Izuku first, telling him that he'll be starting the quirk assessment with a ball throw. Izuku would grab the ball, and Aizawa would explain, as the number one student, or at least the number one student from the entrance exam, he expects a lot from him. Izuku nods as he winds up and launches the ball. It goes soaring, and it goes about 1,500 meters, an insane amount that hasn't been seen since All Might himself. Izuku grips his hand to basically look at it to think, wow, he really does have that type of power, but as he looks over, Aizawa has his quirk active. Izuku looks at him weirdly and asks, why is his hair standing up? Trying to play coy, but at the same time, Aizawa has his suspicions. He questions Izuku. So your quirk isn't exactly deactivatable, huh? Izuku is confused but just shrugs it off, saying that he's never had his quirk deactivated, so he wouldn't know. But, I mean, it is a strength enhancement quirk, so maybe it's just built into his body by now, and he has worked really hard to strengthen that strength enhancement quirk. Izuku would walk over to the line, and Aizawa would nod, but he would be skeptical at the same time. He would continue talking and basically telling everyone who will go next, but people would begin to say that this seems like a lot of fun. Aizawa would remark that this isn't supposed to be fun, and this is no game, so he's going to put up some stakes. Whoever gets last in the exam will not be going to UA anymore. They'll be expelled, and they'll have to figure out where they're going to go from here on out. Aizawa would tell them all to keep going, and let's just say Izuku would blow away the competition. It wouldn't be even close. The only person or only people that would be relatively close to Izuku is Shoto Todoroki and also Katsuki Bakugo. But let's be honest, they're not that close either. Izuku, throughout this entire time, is starting to get used to his powers, slowly but surely. The reveal of All Might's strength enhancement quirk, or at least that's what he believes it to be from the DNA of All Might's and many others, he begins to realize that he has super strength, he has some sort of fire attacks, he has a way to cancel quirks like Aizawa, and many more. He has so much utility and at the same time so much raw strength. Sometimes he'll even believe to himself that maybe he will overdo it sometimes. He might have to be careful in the long run. But after the assessment is over and done with, he was given first, and he would have to act excited as if he wasn't expecting something like this. Of course he should get first. He's a perfect being. At least that's what he was raised and built up to be. Izuku would basically wait for Aizawa to expel the last person, but he would then tell him that this was just a logical ruse to make them try their hardest. Izuku would shrug it off and would end up finishing his classes for the day and then leaving. After that, he would get some talking in with the League of Villains and also with Overhaul and eventually the people that kind of raised him in a way. But to be fair, it's not really raising when he's growing up in a small pod. He would eventually be able to speak with his mother and basically speak about what their goals are and what they are trying to accomplish overall. Of course, things would have to be limited. She can't tell him everything because he might go haywire, might do this, might do that. They need to be careful, especially with a being like Izuku. They don't necessarily have a way to keep him in check. But Izuku's already thinking for himself now. See, that's where they're wrong. They think that they still have him under control, but that's just not the case. Izuku is now learning and thinking for himself. Probably the worst thing that could possibly happen is this specifically. Izuku now realizing something. Maybe it's time for him to become a hero. Maybe it's time for him to really transcend and ignore all of these other people. He's going to be so powerful, so strong. Maybe he should use it to protect people. A part of him is telling him to do so. Maybe it's the All Might side. Maybe ironically enough, it's the Endeavor side. Maybe it's the Mirako. Maybe it's that other side of him from Aizawa and the other heroes telling him that his job is to protect, especially with the power that he has. But he's not sure. He gets that feeling or that instinct, but at the same time, he also gets that instinct sometimes that he'll see a strong fight. He'll see someone that is powerful, someone that may serve as a challenge, and that instinct of wanting to fight derives within him and drives him to do something drastic. Maybe that's something else. Maybe that's built in within him, or maybe that's every single person's DNA and the combination of their will to fight, in which their will to fight is extremely high, especially when we talk about people like All Might, Mirako, and many others. Endeavor himself has basically tried to build this bridge to cross it himself to catch All Might. Some unimaginable task that seems to be impossible, but that also is in Izuku. That idea, that motivation. So Izuku's not so sure, but the next day of UA would then finally arrive after he gets his information from Shigaraki and also the others, learning of the USJ attack that will happen soon to come. Izuku would arrive in Class 1A, and they would begin to speak, or Aizawa would begin to speak about what's going on. And of course, that would be pretty clear. They'll be doing a little bit of hero training, some actual training compared to what they did before. Quirk assessment is far different than hero training, so they'll be having someone else doing it for him, in which the door would swing open and All Might would come flying in. Izuku would almost stand to his feet and would have to restrict himself as All Might screams, "I am here," walking through the door like a normal person. Immediately, Izuku wants to fight him. He's almost breaking his desk out of anxiousness and just excitement, but he knows he has to relax. He needs to calm down. That fight will happen, eventually, of course. All Might would then tell everybody to meet him at Ground Gamma, that they're going to be doing a little bit of hero training. So Izuku gets on his hero outfit, which is just an altered version of the way he looks slightly, and he basically can make himself look slightly different, so it makes it look like he has a hero outfit on, because of course it's not like they designed and planned to have a hero outfit. And he had some ideas that he sent over to the support people, but of course that's not going to go through immediate. And eventually leading them to Ground Gamma. When they would arrive at Ground Gamma, All Might would begin to explain and say that they're waiting for one more person and then they'll begin. That person would finally arrive, and it would be Mirio Togata. Someone that Izuku doesn't know very well, but as he begins to move around, he begins to tell something that within Mirio is a strong fighter. Not only that, it's far more than just being a strong fighter. His quirk is different, far different. It seems to be a mixture of two quirks, maybe even more? He's not so sure, but that will be answered when All Might tells them that it will be Mirio versus all of them at once. He would tell them that Mirio will definitely be up for the challenge and that they'll be surprised how powerful this person is. They begin their fight. The Class 1A versus Mirio Togata, the successor to One for All, or the successor of All Might. And the fight would begin, and it would seem as if Mirio is dominating Class 1A. It's not even close, frankly, and everyone is getting taken out, one by one by one, but it seems like some of the stronger people want to wait their turn. They want their crack at Mirio by themselves, eventually leading it to being Izuku's turn. Izuku will stand there and he begins cracking his neck and then cracking his knuckles. You think this is a good idea? You really believe that you can defeat me? Izuku laughs and begins to smirk, and Mirio says that everyone else before him was cocky until, well, they were knocked out. Izuku charges forward, and as Mirio basically uses his permeation quirk to dodge him, Izuku immediately counters and can follow up exactly where Mirio decides to strike. Mirio unpermeates his hand to punch Izuku in the face, But just as he does, Izuku clashes with it with a punch himself. Izuku tells him that he saw his moves and he now knows exactly how his quirk works. Their fight begins and Izuku is fighting him more or less based on just prediction, thinking and knowing where someone's going to be and how he's going to strike. He begins to try to predict the unpredictable, especially with Mirio's fight style, and it seems like they're dead even, at least for the moment. But until Mirio slips up. He slips up, leaving himself open, and Izuku lands a stern punch to the stomach that absolutely hurts terribly. He punches him directly in one of the kidneys, and Mirio would stagger backwards in complete pain, but he would then activate One for All. Izuku can tell that he was re-energized, reinvigorated, and it seems as if Mirio was ready to fight once again. Izuku would stand his ground and begin to fight him, obviously, again. They would begin to clash over and over and over again, and it seems like Mirio might be gaining some ground as he begins to amp up more and more, but Izuku begins to learn more and more, gaining more and more knowledge of One for All, more and more knowledge about how to accelerate his own powers, and as the fight continues on, the stronger seemingly Izuku is getting, and same with Mirio. But after a while, the fight is eventually stopped. All Might tells them that that's enough, and they look around to see that the area is completely destroyed, and on top of that, everyone else is already out cold. Izuku kind of brushes off some of the hits and tells Mirio that it would be fun to do this one more time in the near future. Mirio says the same as he kind of slightly limps and corrects his body because he can feel some of those punches that Izuku was landing, especially that first one that definitely caught him off guard. All Might congratulates Izuku, telling him that he knew he was talented, but this talented is miraculous. He's never seen someone grow and learn so fast, and Izuku is definitely someone extremely talented, and he'd be a very, very good hero in the near future. But Izuku begins to question All Might, asking about Mirio, that he was able to ramp his strength up, but it seems like his quirk is permeation, and he doesn't think that Mirio was even holding back that much, so how was he getting so much stronger? In which All Might makes up some dumb excuse that Mirio was just holding back a good bit, but he was starting to go all out with Izuku. Izuku sorta doesn't really believe this, and frankly he knows what this is all about and how it happened. He can make his assumptions because he's heard about All Might's power and All Might's strengths. He knows that it can be passed down and that this must be the person. Izuku is still taken back, and of course he knows that All Might wouldn't have been honest with him, but soon he'll learn more and more about exactly who Mirio is. After that class is said and done, they're all allowed to go to the nurse's office if need be, and eventually finishing up the day and going back quote-unquote home. Izuku would bring back some information to the League of Villains, telling them exactly who the successor of All Might is, or at least who he believes it to be. He's about 98% sure. He hasn't been able to 100% confirm it, but he can make his assumptions and he's right there in terms of how correct he is. Especially he then tells Overhaul as well, and he begins to relay information back toward his mother and other people that he needs to relay that information to. But of course Izuku withholds some information that he feels he doesn't need to tell, his progression and all his power, and some other things as well. Izuku then the next day would obviously head to UA, and they would begin their next little training session, you can call it, and that involves the USJ. And this right here is where everything will flip on its head. Izuku sits in class listening to Aizawa, but it's as if it's just a buzz of conversation. Izuku would be thinking in his own head about what needs to go down, what needs to happen, and what's going to happen. He begins to remember the plans, begins to remember every last detail to the most degree, every last aspect. In a matter of no time, they're currently at the USJ, and he can hear the voice of Pro Hero 13 beginning to ring. She begins to say that they're here for rescue training. Izuku continues to listen, more and more and more. He begins to think and wait, and he begins to sense something coming from the middle of the USJ, and he can just feel this immense pressure boiling over him. As the portal opens up, many villains begin to pour out of it, and Aizawa tells Pro Hero 13 to protect the kids as he jumps into action. Izuku watches on as if his eyes are glazed, as if he's just going through the motions at this point. He feels weird. It seems as if he's just walking in a shadow, as if everything going on is not actually in his control. Every last movement. He's portaled away, and eventually he's put exactly with the other villains. The other villains speak about killing All Might, about what that needs to be done, and Shigaraki acts as if he has basically complete control. He acts like he has complete control over Izuku, and on top of that, he's as if he's keeping him hostage, telling Aizawa that he might want to slow down and stop before something drastic really happens. Immediately, Aizawa is confused. What is he supposed to do? He's in a horrible situation. How did they do this so quickly? And why are they leveraging him? Why him of all people? Izuku sits there with Shigaraki's hand on his neck, but just as Aizawa decides to stop, decides that he won't keep fighting if it means that this kid is going to get killed, all of the villains around him drop dead, motionless, flatlined. Izuku is no longer in the hands of Shigaraki, and he stands in front of all of them. Izuku realized what's going on. That glaze was literal control. Whatever they did, whatever they mimicked, and whatever they changed in his machinery, or whatever they added to him when they were making him, they were trying to gain full control of his being. He realized something, that he was strong enough to break free. And that's exactly what he did. That glaze clears up, and it's as everything brightens up, and the world around him is now regular, changed. He now sees things for how it is. He looks towards Shigaraki and tilts his head, asking if he knew about this, asking if he knew that he truly did have control. Shigaraki is shocked to hear what Izuku is saying. Shigaraki shakes his head as if he knows something bad is going to happen. But Izuku just walks over toward them slowly but surely, telling them that he's decided something, and he'll understand quickly what. He slams Shigaraki to the ground and then tosses Kurogiri to the side. Obviously, Kurogiri just warp portals back into a position, but Shigaraki gets sent flying toward a wall as Kurogiri is able to save him just in time. Aizawa is shocked to see what's happening, but Izuku stops in his tracks as well, telling Aizawa that he needs to get out of here now. Aizawa says that he can't do that, but Izuku tells him there is no going back anymore. But he's confused. What is that supposed to mean? What are you talking about? Izuku raises his hands and says that he has free will now, and he will decide exactly what he wants. All Might would come blasting through the wall, basically screaming his normal phrase that he is here and ready to protect. But immediately Izuku points toward All Might and smiles and tells Aizawa that's what he wants. Aizawa is shocked to hear this. What is going on? As Izuku begins to reach out one arm, his left arm begins to change, turning into this odd looking figure. He grows in size to the point that he's 7, maybe 8 feet tall, towering over everybody. Izuku smiles and begins to talk, not sinisterly, but at the same time in a way of such threat, in a way of such emotion that he wants a fight. Immediately, All Might comes charging in to stop the villains, but Izuku steps in front of him, grabbing him by the face, slamming him into the ground, and he begins to shake his head. Not even as strong as Mirio. I knew it. He grabs All Might and throws him to the wall as Shigaraki begins to think that maybe he's slowly but surely back on his side, but a flame or a giant wave of fire gets sent towards Shigaraki and Kurogiri is forced to warp them out of the way. He begins to walk over toward All Might as he says not to worry, that after his death, he'll go after the League of Villains and he'll be able to basically take down whoever he wants, because all he wants right now is a challenge. He tells All Might if he doesn't give him that challenge, there's going to be dire consequences. All Might comes charging forward, delivering exactly what Izuku wants, but Izuku, technically, and being a tactician, is able to slip under every single punch, dodge every little bit, and absolutely obliterate All Might. This isn't even a fair fight. His DNA is built for exactly this fight alone. Every last bit of martial arts within his body and every last piece of DNA that allows him to counter All Might is there. He begins to counter and defeat All Might over and over and over again. The students are watching on, and Aizawa tells them all they need to leave now. Something is happening. Immediately though, as they're about to leave, the other heroes charge in. Aizawa tells them that they need to help All Might now or else. Immediately bullets would be shot toward Izuku, but Izuku would just dodge them with relative ease. One would graze his leg, but it wouldn't do immense damage. He would be able to shrug it off just enough. He grabs All Might by the head and begins to lift him up, telling every last hero that this symbol of peace wasn't a challenge, that he lost that title a long time ago. And Izuku himself, as he points the thumb at his face, he begins to say that All Might is not the perfect hero. To them, maybe he is, but perfect is only in regard of himself. He begins to throw All Might up as he plunges his hand through his chest, as blood begins to spill and the symbol of peace begins to bleed out. Izuku looks at them and says that there's no use even trying to save him. There's no point. Not at all. He begins to walk over toward them as he would appear in front of them in a matter of seconds. He would look them dead in the eyes as this hulking figure just hovers above all of them. He tells them all that this is the end. This is over. He won't be seeing them anytime soon unless they truly want to give him a challenge. But he now knows that quirks are inefficient, that these so-called quirks that they hold are nothing. He looks around to see if the Nomu is still currently there, and Izuku smirks to see that it got taken back. He now knows that, well, that Nomu wouldn't have stood a chance anyways, and they withdraw the Nomu to preserve what they've invested in it. Izuku looks at them, smirks, and then disappears. All of them are in complete shock, Aizawa especially, not knowing exactly what happened, but just as their shock wears off, they sprint toward the former symbol of peace, All Might, in hopes of saving him. But is there even a way to save All Might after that brutal injury? And what does this mean for Izuku's next steps in this world? And has he truly become a perfect being? Izuku Midoriya has now finally had his realization. A realization that he no longer needs anybody. He begins his journey, you could call it. His true journey to being the perfect being. And it all starts with arriving back at the lab where it all started. He would arrive back at that said lab, and he would immediately begin taking parts and things out of the lab, bringing it over to a secluded hideout that he begins to create. On top of that, he heads back to the lab to make sure to get Eri, the young child that basically has some insane amounts of power, but on top of that, well, she's just a kid. He wants to make sure that she's fine, but when he would, well, look around, once again, she would no longer be there. He wouldn't know what's going on, but just as he turns around, Overhaul grabs him by the arm and immediately tries to use his quirk on him. But for some reason, it doesn't work. Overhaul stumbles back slightly, questioning what the hell he is. Izuku tells him that he's more than he can possibly imagine. He's far, far, far greater than anybody on this planet, anybody ever. Izuku tells Overhaul that his little trick last time won't work ever again. He's beyond that. Far beyond that. He grabs Overhaul by the neck and begins to drag him out as he's squeezing his neck, basically to the point of him passing out. He would drag Overhaul away and immediately bring him to the center of a city. He would then tell Overhaul, while they're waiting here and about to begin his next step in this more or less plan, he has to ask, where's the young girl that was in that lab and the other two people that were in the lab as well? Overhaul slightly smirks, and that's all Izuku needs to know. Izuku begins to hold his neck tighter once again, not choking him out this time, but draining something from Overhaul. He's confused, but it seems as if Izuku is draining the quirk straight out of him. He begins to float into the air as he echoes his voice all around the city, telling them all to quickly listen or there's going to be dire consequences. Izuku says that he's here to eliminate all of these people, all of these horrible, horrible beings. But all he truly wants is a fight to the very end. But it seems as if nobody truly wants to give him that. Nobody can give him that. Which is fine. It's all dandy and fine. But the only problem with it is that he'll soon get bored and people will soon die. Izuku then kills Overhaul in front of many that are out there, telling them all to wait. And soon he'll continue this, destruction of every single villain. He throws Overhaul to the ground. His body would then fall limp. Izuku would then tell everybody to bring their biggest and best champions. That there will soon, very soon, in the days coming, be a reckoning. He wants to fight the best. He'll exterminate the evil from this planet, and then he'll do what he wants next. Maybe he'll even travel beyond just this place. Beyond just Japan. Beyond even outside of Japan. He feels this power surging through him and tells everybody to bring on their champions. Just as Izuku would leave, days would pass and everything would fall silent, as if the entire world would go, still. They're terrified of what they made, the monster that was created. Many wanted to know who created this monster, but it didn't matter, because those responsible were dead, and Izuku's connection to this world was no longer firm. Izuku, after days would pass, would arrive once again, actually at UA. He would stand in front, waiting, telling everybody that the time has now come, that a fight needs to be bestowed upon him, or else. Izuku would wait, and eventually heroes and villains alike would show up. Villains would know that their day would come if they didn't team up with the heroes, and the heroes knew that their day would come if they could not give Izuku a proper battle. Izuku would be happy to see this as he sees these monster-like Nomus, as well as All For One, Shigaraki, and many others show up as well. He'd tell them that those monster Nomus are nothing compared to his perfect being. Of course, All For One believes that not to be true. That he believes that he created something perfect, or a monster that could really stand up to Izuku. But that's not the case. Not even close. Izuku would first wipe out all of the Nomu, telling them that that's cheating, and it's flawed in their regard. Izuku is the perfect being, and creating something out of someone else is disgusting. He realizes what he is, but he was created in the eyes of perfection, a combination of many of the people here and those who have passed along the way. Izuku tells them all that they all are allowed to fight at one time. Why not? He's not into a tournament-like format, and this is no game. So, they should all bring their best, in which the heroes and villains do just that. All For One, Mirio Togata, and even the strongest heroes alike like Endeavor and many others come charging in. They try all of their best, comboing attacks, activating quirks, anything you can think of, even contraptions that were made for this very day. But it seemed as if everything was useless. They would watch on as heroes and villains would get cut down slowly but surely. With a grin on Izuku's face, he would continue the slaughter. He would begin to completely and utterly obliterate person after person after person, as if there was no regard for anything but battle. Izuku would clash with people like Mirio, All for One, at the same time. A Mirio with One for All, and who's been training like all hell, but it doesn't matter. There is no power that can keep up with the perfect being, and that's what Izuku is. The biggest issue, though, is that they really had no chance in the very beginning. All for One would come charging in, trying to use everything in his repertoire, but nothing would work. Izuku would even tell them that he could make them all the strongest they've ever been. He reaches out and rewinds all of them back to their primes, making all of them as strong as they possibly could be, or those who are younger, transferring them forward. But he would look at all of them. Even in this state, it doesn't matter. Nothing matters. There is no fight. There is no battle that they even stand a chance at winning. Izuku would smirk and would continue to obliterate all of them even when they were at their peak performance. Nothing even matters. Eventually, other countries would send reinforcements, #1 heroes of every last one of them, including America. And when they would arrive, they would try their best to fend off anything Izuku was attacking with, but even Star and Stripe would have no chance. At the end of the day, Izuku Midoriya isn't actually Izuku Midoriya. All he is an embodiment of a bio-android that was created from the body of the dead kid at a young age. Izuku wasn't truly that person. He was deemed perfect. That's all he knew. He was a perfect specimen, perfect person, a perfect being. There was no name attached to him. They may know him by Izuku Midoriya, but he truly is not that person. Izuku, who we know as Izuku, would mock them, would laugh at them, would tell them that this was never going to go their way. They didn't even have a chance even with extra days. They could have had years, and Izuku could have had days, and they still would have lost. Because you cannot train, you cannot bring your body to the peak of perfection without being himself. Izuku makes this utterly clear as everybody is beaten, battered, and destroyed, laying on the ground practically lifeless. Izuku would raise one hand and say that he's bored now. This is all over. Electricity would sparkle and crackle from his hand all the way to the sky as this giant orb of electricity begins to arrive all above him. He tells them all that it was fun while it lasted, even if it didn't last very long. He then points his hand back to the ground as this sphere of energy goes hurling down, slamming into the city as it electrocutes everybody around and explodes in a blaze of glory. Like a sun crashing down onto Earth, Izuku watches on and smiles and laughs maniacally as everything is obliterated in a 10-mile radius all around. All the heroes that were in front of him at this point, all dead, all destroyed. Izuku would begin scouring the world, trying to find anybody else left to fight. Unfortunately, and well, fortunately for them, they would be in hiding, away, hoping that one day Izuku would eventually leave. But he would grow bored, want a challenge, and soon he would use all the technology and information he had to begin creating bio-androids for himself. Someone that could stand up to him, someone that was built from him. Perfection could only be created by someone who was perfect themselves. So this made the most sense for Izuku. This made the most sense for his next step forward. But what would happen in the near future for the people who were hiding and for the people that were gone and dead? well, that's a story for another day, and a story that may not be told in this realm. And if you enjoyed, make sure to leave a like, a sub, and a comment down below, all that good stuff. Sorry for this being a little bit shorter. I wanted to make this wrap up pretty easily, because I mean there really was no other way of putting this out and taking it or basically taking it any further than me making some random stuff up. But we all knew how this was going to end at the end of the day. But as always, if you enjoyed, make sure to leave a like, make sure to leave a sub, make sure to leave a comment down below, all that good stuff. And I hope you all enjoyed, like I said. And yeah, I'll be trying to brainstorm some new ideas for some new series, and hopefully y'all enjoy those. Yeah, all right, peace out, boys. Later.